Room 313, the hotel that doesn't exist. The rain began as a whisper and ended as a wall. It pushed the highway into a smear of white and red, wipers thumping like a tired metronome. He'd missed the exit twice, then a third time, drifting past a construction barricade and the mouth of a detour that looked like it had been there for years. The GPS stuttered, recalculated, and went silent. Only then, at the bottom of a hill that didn't belong on any map he remembered, did he see the sign. Willow House Hotel. Vacancy? The letters were hand-painted, black on a washed-out board, a soft glow haloing them as if the rain itself had learned how to hold a candle. He pulled in because the car felt lighter when he did, as if the road had been pressing on the bumper, urging him onward. He pulled in because it was late. He'd driven too far, and the notion of making it to the next town felt like trying to swim uphill. A gravel drive cracked under the tires. The building that rose from it was 3 stories, narrow as a spine, with a porch that sagged in the middle like a smile too long forced. A thin, tinny chime sounded when he opened the glass door and stepped into a lobby that still smelled faintly of wood polish and old tobacco. A ceiling fan traced slow circles that did not move the air. Between a brass umbrella stand and a rack of postcards no one would buy. A bell sat on the counter. He touched it with one finger. The sound it made was soft and perfectly round. A second later, the door behind the counter opened. The night clerk was pale, in the way of people who know the dark well. He wore a suit that might have been black or simply tired, and his hair was parted with a precision that suggested an earlier era. He did not smile. He also did not frown. He acknowledged the traveler's existence like someone recognizing their own reflection in a window they'd forgotten was there. "Late," the clerk said, voice low and even. "But we're open." "Just a room," the traveler replied. He would later struggle to recall if he'd offered his name at this point, or if he had only thought it. He remembered how his tongue felt heavy, as if the rain had seeped inside him and settled along the nerves. "Of course," said the clerk. "One night?" "One night." The clerk consulted a ledger, not a computer. The pages were creamy and lined, the handwriting neat. He dipped a pen in ink and made a note, the nib scratching like the smallest possible animal across brittle leaves. The traveler's eyes wandered while the clerk worked. The lobby's wallpaper was a faded botanical, ferns that had lost the green and become the color of old tea. A glass case held a collection of brass keys on heavy tags. Above the fireplace, which was cold, a painting of a willow tree bent over a black stream. Its leaves were so delicately rendered that if the traveler stared long enough, he could feel them moving. "We have a few vacancies," the clerk said, closing the ledger. "Second floor, third floor." "Something quiet." "They're all quiet," the clerk said. Then, as if reconsidering, "Except the one that's sealed." "Sealed?" "Room 313, the clerk said. "But you won't be staying there." The traveler laughed, but not because it was funny. He had an impulse to say something dismissive, to puncture the surface of the oddness with a joke, but the room seemed to disapprove of noise. He took the key the clerk offered, 312, stamped into worn brass, and the moment it rested in his palm, he felt cooler. "Coffee in the morning," the clerk said. 7 sharp. You can make use of the parlor tonight if you feel like sitting. No smoking in the rooms. There's a Bible in the drawer if you need it." "I won't," the traveler said, surprising himself with the certainty. He could not remember the last time he'd opened a Bible, or why he'd feel compelled to now. But the thought of the thin pages made something in his chest curl up. He climbed the stairs, the carpet thudding underfoot, the narrow window on each landing holding a rectangle of rain. On the second floor, a chandelier with 6 missing bulbs threw a weak, honey light. The numbers on the doors were oval plaques, mother of pearl dulled by years of fingers. He found 312 at the end of the hall. The door across from it bore no number at all. Only later would he realize that this mattered. In the room, he did the things a traveler does. He set his bag on the chair and his phone on the nightstand. He tried the lamp and found it worked, but it put off a yellow more suited to sepia photographs than to reading. The window looked down into the parking lot. His car squatted under the rain like a tired animal. The bedspread had a pattern that suggested vines, but they braided into loops that were not found in nature. He showered. The water was hot enough to fog the mirror and loosen the tight places in his shoulders. He thought about the way the clerk had said sealed and decided it was a small town's habit of exaggeration, a little flair to coax a tip or a story free. He toweled off and stood there, looking at his reflection in the half-cleared oval of the mirror, and admitted to himself that he felt watched. Not by a person, by the building, by the room itself, as if it were curious about what he would do next. He turned in. He did not sleep. The rain slowed, but the sound of it did not fade. It learned a new key, a whisper instead of a drum. He lay there, counting it, and kept losing the number. When he finally stood, the red digits of the bedside clock said 3:12. He thought of the sealed room. He did not want to. That is the honest truth. He put on his shoes and the jacket that still remembered warmth from the car's vents. He took his key, and after a pause, long enough to make it obvious to himself what he was doing, he took the room key out of his pocket and turned it in his hand, watching the brass catch the light. Then he was in the hallway, which now felt a few inches narrower. The rug had a seam he didn't remember stepping over before. A draft moved past his ankles as if someone had opened a door down the hall. He did not knock. He stood in front of the door with no number, and when his hand found the knob, he expected it to be loose, to rattle against a latch that hadn't been set in years. Instead, it was solid, cold, and very much not sealed. He pushed. The hinges made no sound. The door opened a sash width, then wider, with a sigh like a mattress giving in to the shape of a familiar body. He told himself he was only going to look. He'd tilt his head in, take a breath of stale air, laugh in relief, and return to his own room, where he would lie in the bed and finally sleep until the light found him. What he found first was dust. It lay thick on the floorboards, pillow soft in the places where the bed legs had pressed, gathered into a skein beneath a chair. And everywhere else it stood as a fine law that time had attempted to write and given up on before the last letter. The smell was old linen and the faintest track of soap. Not rot, not neglect. More like someone else's attic, carefully locked, opened once a decade to check that everything inside had not learned how to breathe. The room was a twin to his own, with the same window, the same bedstead, the same black-framed mirror above a writing desk. But his eyes were not on these things. They were on the guestbook that lay open on the desk, its ribbon pressed between pages like a held breath. He stepped within. The dust did not rise. His footprint did not appear. For a moment, he believed he did not quite touch the floor, and then he did not have to decide if that was true, because his hand was on the book, and the paper beneath his fingers was warm. The entries were neat, mostly. Names with dates, towns that could be found on highways that didn't carry the right number anymore. Gratitude scrolled across the lines. A lovely stay, rain at last, slept like I used to. Then a new tone, a stutter in the ink, noise in the hall. Key turned itself. Leave the light on. One page was torn out. The next entry kept its dignity, but it was a strained thing. It was dated in the summer of 1974. There were no entries after that. He closed his eyes, as if to erase what he'd seen and give the book a chance to be innocent when he opened them again. The dust was still unmarked. He could hear the rain on the glass like a hand tapping from the other side, and maybe the sound in the wall was a pipe contracting, and maybe the faint scent of lavender was just his memory assembling a smell it hadn't had a reason to think of in years. He touched the pen. It lay beside the book, full of ink, its nib dark, as if something had taken a drink and left it out of politeness. He moved it without meaning to. It touched the page with a weight that wasn't his own. A small blot formed, perfect as a new moon. He drew his hand back and saw his name written there. It was his handwriting. It was not. His name, tonight's date, the city he'd come from. A message he did not remember composing, but that did not surprise him once his eyes took it in. Road not where it should be. Room waiting anyway. He had the sudden sensation of tasting metal, the way you do when a filling catches a fryer of heat for no good reason. He closed the book gently. He put the pen where it had been. He looked up at the mirror, perhaps to see if he was pale or flushed or missing, and whatever he saw there convinced him to back toward the door. He did not look again. He closed the door. He turned the knob from the hall side and found it did not lock. In his room, the clock had advanced a minute. 3:13. He lay on the bed fully dressed. The rain finally learned how to stop. He waited for morning as if it were a ferry he might still miss. He woke to sunlight that had not asked permission. It had squeezed itself through the cracks around the blinds and warmed his eyes until they opened. The bedspread had a crease across his chest, as if someone had smoothed it while he slept. At some point, he had moved from on top of the covers to under them. He could not remember his body feeling heavy enough to lift the blankets, but here he was, coherent and dry. He thought of getting up, getting coffee, leaving the hotel the way one leaves a shed, reversing every step of entry, respectfully, apologizing to the air so the dust would settle again in the shape he'd found it. Instead, he lay there and looked at the ceiling. A crack ran from one corner, wandered across, and ended nowhere. It had the indifference of an old scar. The knock on the door was a polite knock. 2 taps, pause, 1 more. He opened. The housekeeper stood there with a stack of towels white enough to suggest they were new in perpetuity. She was older, smaller than she seemed at first, and her eyes were a gray that reminded him of the first minute of dusk. "Fresh towels," she said. "Thank you." She put them on the dresser and glanced once at the window as if confirming the world was still out there. Her gaze lingered on the wall the traveler shared with the unnumbered door. If she noticed the way his eyes followed hers, she didn't say. "Busy night?" he asked, because silence was beginning to feel like a savings account he could not stop checking. "No," she said. "We're quiet." "We've been quiet a long time." He waited, but she had only that to offer. "Last night," he said, trying not to sound like he was looking for a confession. The clerk mentioned a sealed room. The housekeeper's lips tightened. It was not quite disapproval. It was more like she was holding a word between them so it couldn't escape. "The third floor," she said. "We keep that floor closed most of the year. It's easier to clean if there's less to clean. Saves on electric, too." "I tried a door last night," he said before he could help himself, "across from mine. No number. Not sealed." If she was surprised, she hid it with the practice of a person who had been surprised too often to let it become a hobby. "Across from yours is the linen closet," she said, and then gentler. "Sometimes the wood swells with the weather. Doors stick, doors don't. They've got their own ideas. You don't want to go opening closets when you don't need anything in there." "I didn't," he said. It was the truth. He hadn't needed anything in there. He had only needed to know. She stood very still. Then she picked up the towels she'd set down and examined them, as if confirming they were what she'd brought. "If you hear something in the night," she said, "don't open the door. That's just a general rule." "Is it a rule for the hotel?" he asked. "Or for that room?" She set the towels down again, softer this time. She looked at his face as if she were trying to see a person she had been told about as a child and had not expected to meet. "Coffee's at 7 in the parlor," she said. "There are muffins, if the clerk remembered." "He doesn't always. He forgets the sugar for the coffee almost always. That's how I know it's him." "Who?" "The night clerk," she said. "You met him?" "Yes." "Well," she said, "there's your proof." When she left, the room felt bigger without becoming any less full. He dressed and went downstairs. The parlor held a table with a coffee urn that had been polished so many times the brass had mellowed. There were indeed muffins, some of them blueberry, some wishing they were. A dish held sugar packets, as if the universe had decided to contradict the housekeeper, just to see if she'd notice. The clerk was not at the desk. The lobby held no one but him, and yet there was no sense of vacancy. He poured coffee, sat in a chair whose cushion tried gamely to keep its shape, and stared at the painting above the cold fireplace. The willow's branches were longer than he remembered from last night. They trailed the water and made dimples that never widened into ripples. He considered leaving without checking out. He considered leaving with a fair and proper goodbye. He considered asking the clerk again about the sealed room and seeing how far that question could stretch before it snapped or tangled. Instead, he took his coffee for a walk. The hallways were different in daylight. They looked as if they had learned how to hold their breath. He found a stair at the back, narrower than the main one, meant for staff, and climbed it just to feel something real underfoot. The third floor was dimmer, the ceiling lower by an inch, and warmer, as if the roof gifted its heat to the air out of habit. The first door he tried had a number, 308. The next, 309. The plaques here were darker, the polish uneven, and the carpet had a pattern under the pattern, like a face you could only see when you squinted. Ivy, and beneath it, something that did not grow in any garden. He moved toward the far end, where the light failed entirely, and then learned that it hadn't. It had simply been hoarding itself for the last door. Room 313 was there. The plate was missing. The shape where it had been was a lighter oval, like skin under a ring. The door was painted the same color as the others, and yet it did not match. If he held his head a certain way, it lengthened. If he blinked, it returned to normal. He placed his palm against it and felt, not warmth, not chill. He felt the absence of both, a neutrality so complete it became a sensation in itself. He called out once, his voice low. He did not knock. He heard something inside move, but not across the floor. The sound was tension relaxing, a drawn bow letting its string grow slack. He took his hand away and stood there, breathing as quietly as he could, as if the door had ears that took offense at arrogance. Twice in his life, he had felt this particular certainty. Once behind the wheel of a car, watching an accident begin on the far lane. A slow slippage he could see but could not change. Once in a hospital room, watching a heartbeat on a monitor turn into a line that did not yet understand what it had become. This was like both. There was a future waiting on the other side of this door that he could neither prevent nor choose. All he could do was decide whether to walk into it or allow it to walk into him. The housekeeper found him there. "You don't want to open that," she said, and her voice was not unkind. "It's sealed," he said, because he did not know what else to say. Her eyes went to his hand, which had returned to the doorknob as if it were a glass of water on a nightstand. "It was," she said. "Was?" "Years ago," she said. "Something happened. They said it was a joke, a dare, a prank that got mean the way some things do when you feed them attention. Someone didn't check out, or they did, but no one saw them leave. People say it takes what it needs to make the story work." "What story?" "The one it tells itself," she said. "The one people tell about it." He should have laughed. He should have stepped away, taken both hands and put them in his pockets, apologized to her, apologized to the door, and gone downstairs to finish his coffee and write a review about stale muffins and an old charm he would recommend to anyone with the patience for places that decide the pace of their own days. Instead, he listened to the ceiling crack a little and the floor find its voice the way wood does when it wonders if it has to hold up anything heavy. He listened to his own breathing, and he didn't like how it sounded like he was preparing to dive. "I saw the guestbook," he said finally. Her face did something complicated. It fell and lifted at the same time. "Did you write in it?" He did not answer. His hand tightened on the knob, then loosened of its own accord, as if the door and his palm had agreed to give each other a chance to reconsider. "I'll tell you something," she said, and stepped close enough that he could see the stitches where her uniform pocket had been repaired. "When I was a girl, my mother told me never to step on the black squares on a kitchen floor. They weren't meant for feet. 'Those are for the room to stand on,' she'd say. 'We get the white ones. That's the deal. This hotel is full of black squares you can't see. Don't put your weight on them just because you think they're the same as the rest.'" He nodded because nodding was easier than choosing. She left. The hallway took a breath he did not want it taking. He stepped back from the door, and the neutrality under his hand cooled into indifference. He returned to his room. He packed. He reminded himself there was a highway, there were exits, there were towns with L-shaped malls and gas stations where the coffee always tasted like someone had washed the pot in the same sink as the mop. There were the places he was going and the people waiting for him to arrive or to prove that arriving was what he would do if he ever could. At the front desk, the clerk had returned. He wore a different tie, or perhaps the same one had remembered how to be a darker shade. The ledger lay open, and what had last night been neat words were now almost gentle. He looked up as the traveler approached, and if there was surprise at the early checkout, it did not get an invitation into the clerk's face. "Leaving us?" the clerk asked. "Yes." "Breakfast not to your liking?" "It was fine," the traveler said. "I have miles to cover." We all do, the clerk said. Rates are by the night. He paid. The clerk gave him a receipt that looked like something a museum would mistake for an artifact. The traveler folded it and put it in his wallet. He was almost out the door when a thought he should not have had became a sentence, and the sentence became his voice. "Who was in 313? He asked. "The last time it was open?" The clerk did not answer at once. The silence had a texture now. The traveler pictured a room stuffed with old furniture and sheets, and the wickering of dried leaves. He pictured a girl with a ribbon in her hair. He pictured a man with his face turned toward a corner, because the corner was important in the way of places that pretend not to matter. "I don't know, sir," the clerk said at last. "I only mind the desk at night." The traveler almost smiled. The clerk's expression remained a plain page. "Safe travels," the clerk said, "if the road brings you back." He went out, his bag a familiar weight. The air held the smell of wet gravel and something sweet, as if a line of trees he couldn't see had agreed to bloom all at once. He got in the car. He started the engine. The radio came alive with static, and then adjusted itself into a song he knew, and then didn't. When he looked up, the hotel windows were black squares layered with white shears. The third-floor window at the shallow gable had no curtain. It stared at him like an eye that believes itself to be a window and is not yet ready to argue. He put the car in gear. He drove to the gravel's edge and turned left. He did not look back. 3 miles down the road, the rain returned, not out of the sky, but from the surface. The asphalt sweated it, bringing it up in a mist that settled on the windshield in a film. He tapped the wipers. They swept, and his view grew more and more transparent and somehow less useful. The highway rolled under him and pulled him forward, and finally, he realized he had done the thing he had promised himself not to do. He had turned the wrong way. The road sloped. The roadside trees thickened. A sign he did not read in time fluttered past. The shoulder narrowed, then widened, then showed him the gravel drive and the hand-painted sign. And then there was the hotel, its tin roof holding a trickle of light that hadn't been there a second before. He did not pull in. He was not that person yet. He drove past, heart in the throat, and watched in the rear view as the sign vanished like someone had lifted it off its hooks in one move. The hotel did not shrink in the mirror. It simply receded until the mirror decided not to show it anymore. He kept going. He found the interstate again, and the world returned to the pretense of being normal. Billboards, exits with gas and snacks, a rest area with vending machines that all had the same scratch on the glass. He stopped there. He sat in the car with the engine off, and his hands did not shake even though he had expected they would. He told himself a story about fatigue and coincidence. He told himself about storm waters and night roads, and the way old towns had a habit of preserving their edges, where the present is afraid to rot. He told himself that the clerk was just a man, that the housekeeper was just a woman, that the room was a box with a bed like any other, and the guestbook was no different from the ones at weddings, except the handwriting was older, and the ink was upheld by memory instead of photographs. He took the folded receipt out of his wallet and looked at it. The date at the top was wrong. It was 3 days in the past. The clerk had written room 312, but the 2 had a tail that might have been a 3 before someone had convinced it to behave. He put the receipt back. He did not tell himself any more stories. The weeks that followed learned his name without him having to teach it to them. He worked. He slept poorly, but that was not new. He began keeping a notebook beside the bed and did not write in it. He walked past the guest room in his house the way soldiers walk past flags they don't want to salute. He started to notice the time. In elevators. On the microwave. On the corner of the computer screen that always ran 5 minutes fast until it decided to be honest. 3:13 appeared like a suggestion. He woke to it. He arrived at grocery lines at it. He left meetings with exactly that many minutes left until the hour. Once, while scrolling mindlessly, he tapped a video and the time bar showed him 3:13 remaining, and he didn't press play. He avoided hotels. He slept in his car once just to prove he could. He told himself he was ridiculous. He told himself he was fine. When the rain came, it seemed to carry the smell of the Willow House, a soft, white odor like the undersides of petals. He looked the hotel up, finally. He could not find it. He found a town of the same name, a county, an old article about a willow that had been the pride of a square and had fallen in a storm that had eaten, as the author phrased it, the last of our borrowed afternoons. But nothing about a hotel. Nothing with that sign. Nothing on a map that looked like the turn he'd missed. He called information on a whim he thought he'd given up in college. The operator could not locate a listing. He drove one Saturday out that way and found the long way and the shortcut and the dead end that used to be a bridge, and then he stopped looking. The car felt heavy when he did. He would be fine, he told himself. He would be fine if he kept the rules. No hotels older than his parents, no rooms that faced the parking lot, no painted signs, no ledgers. He would be fine if he did not travel at night, if he did not listen to the peculiar weather of his own thoughts. He was fine until he wasn't. It happened on a trip he could not avoid, a conference that was important enough to pretend it was not dispensable. He set aside the old rules because they made him feel childish. He booked a room downtown in a hotel with glass elevators and pillow chocolates that confessed their ingredients with pride. The lobby smelled like citrus and ferns that had never seen dirt. The staff wore name tags that glowed slightly. He checked in. He took the elevator. He stepped out into a hallway carpeted with a pattern that tried to convince him it was a topographical map of a place where nothing bad could happen. His door was 1313. He stood there a long time. He considered asking for a different room, and did not because he did not want to say the number out loud. He considered going home, and did not because there were people waiting on floors above for him to be the version of himself who booked flights and showed up. He pressed the key card to the slot. The light turned green. Inside, the suite was clean and new and too cold. He turned up the thermostat and felt foolish for his relief when it responded with a soft, modern click. He set his bag down. He stood in the middle, turning slowly, as if the room might try to sneak up behind him if he faced the window too long. On the desk lay a leather folio with hotel information printed in a font a designer somewhere had loved. He flipped it open to confirm there was no guest book. There was not. There was a card with the room number embossed at the top to assist the forgetful. He thought about tearing it in half and didn't. He set it down and went to draw the curtains. The window looked out on a building across a narrow alley. Its bricks were clean and uniform. The lights in the other windows were healthy and career-minded. He saw his reflection briefly in the glass, and then the reflection became a long hallway behind him, the kind that belonged to older, narrower buildings, the kind where rugs remember every foot. He closed the curtains. He should have gone downstairs and found company and noise and the relief of people clinking glasses at nothing in particular. Instead, he sat at the desk and told himself he was being smarter than he felt. He opened his laptop. He typed his password, and when he looked up again, there was a leather-bound book where the folio had been. He did not touch it. The room hummed, the way electrical rooms do, a sound at the edge of tone. He kept his hands on the laptop as if it were a wheel, and he was steering a boat very slowly toward a dock. He waited to wake up from an hour he had not yet fallen asleep into. He stared at the Wi-Fi symbol until it looked like a sketch of a shell. He reached for the book. It was heavy. It smelled like it had learned a long time ago to smell like books should. The ribbon clung to the page it lay across. He worked it free. The paper beneath had been so recently written on that the ink was still finishing the work of drying. A name had been blacked out. Not erased, blotted by water or by a thumb. A date was visible. The year was old enough to bring down the air in his chest when he read it. The message was short. Don't open the door when it knocks. The page before was familiar. His name, the small moon of a blot, the message about a road. He turned back a page and kept turning. The handwriting changed and changed again. The date slid backward. The paper browned gently. The tone became more careful. Words repeated. Noise in the hall. Key turned itself. Leave the light on. He ran out of pages. The back cover was scarred where someone had tried to carve something and then thought better of it. He closed the book as if it were an eye he was trying not to wake. And then he put it on the desk, turned in his chair, and faced the door. The knock came at 3:13. 2 taps. Pause. 1 more. He did not move. He did not breathe as if he could convince his own lungs they had never existed. The room's hum frowned. The air in the vents stopped trying. The world asked a question, and he told it nothing. The knock came again. 2. Pause. 1. His phone lit, a message on the screen from an unknown number. Front desk. Your key has demagnetized. Allow us to assist. He turned the phone face down. It buzzed. He flipped it over. A new message. It's me. The name displayed was his own. He stood. You can promise yourself you will not do a thing and then watch your hand make you a liar. He crossed the room because his legs had no other jobs. He put his palm on the door because his palm liked to be useful. He turned the handle because even bad ideas appreciate the legality of an invitation. The hallway beyond was not the hotels. It was the Willow houses. It smelled like ferns that had once been green. It heard like rugs that can tell when it is midnight. The light was the same honey that hides dust without pretending the dust has not won. The window at the far end held a slice of rain. He did not step over the threshold. The rules he had never learned and the rules he had already broken conspired to keep him a half-inch inside his own life. He reached his hand around the edge of the door and felt for the outside knob. It was wooden, and it did not belong to the building he was in. A key lay on the hallway runner. Not a keycard, not the hotel's impatience. A brass key with a heavy tag. 313. He heard movement above him, not footsteps. Wood making the sound wood makes when it remembers having to carry something for a long time. He withdrew his hand and closed the door and stood there, the brass key warm in his palm, wanting so much to be the person who returned it to a desk that would accept it. He placed the key on the desk beside the book and went to the bathroom and ran the tap. He watched the water clear. He splashed his face and did not see his reflection move on its own. When he came back, the key had laid itself on the open guestbook, on a blank page, as if weighing it down against a breeze. He turned away from it and lay on the bed and did not sleep. The night stored minutes like seeds. In the morning, he checked out. The clerk at this hotel had color in his cheeks and a rhythm to his small talk and a smile that understood its assignment. The traveler asked nothing. He folded the bill and put it in his wallet with the other. He did not think about the numbers. He did not think about the city's name missing from the heading. He did not think about the way the elevator had skipped the 13th floor last night and then decided not to. He drove home, and every intersection felt like a question that no longer had more than one answer. For a while, he avoided sleep as if it were an acquaintance whose company he could not afford. When he did sleep, he dreamed of hallways that intersected at strange angles, of rooms inside rooms, of windows that looked in. In the dreams, the Willow House was not a building, but a corridor that turned and always found a new door at a distance that stayed exactly the same. What made the nights worse were not the dreams, but the moments when he woke from them at 3:13 and felt certain he had not been asleep. In those moments, his room felt like a set where the crew had done their best. The wall behind his headboard felt like a door he had laid a bed against. He would not move the bed. He might have, once. He would not do it now. He began to write. Not because he wanted to, but because the guestbook had rewritten his hand. He wrote times. He wrote the way the light through curtains learns a new language every afternoon. He wrote his name and then the lines beside it and then the message he would leave for someone who did not yet exist, but would. Don't open the door when it knocks. He left the note on his nightstand. He moved it one morning to his wallet and carried it there until it yellowed. He moved it back to the nightstand and left the wallet empty, and the empty space in the wallet was a relief he resented. The housekeeper from the Willow House began to occupy his thoughts in a way he did not want to examine. Not as a person, but as a caution. He heard her voice in grocery aisles. We've been quiet a long time, and in the static between songs on the radio, don't put your weight on the black squares. He went to the theater one evening out of defiance. The film was a crowd pleaser. The humor was rehearsed in a way that made the audience feel safe. He saw, in the dark, a shape in the exit signs read and left early. He received a postcard without a stamp. It was tucked under his door. The image was a painting of a willow tree. The back read only, "Vacancy." It was not signed. It did not need to be. He stopped pretending. It was a matter of relief in the end. He could not take the strain of waiting for something to find him. He drove out one last time. He took the long way, the short way, the dead end that used to be a bridge. He did not find the hotel. He parked where the road bent in a way he did not remember, and the rain began from the ground again, and he waited until the mist became a curtain for a stage, and the curtain finally rose. The Willow House stood there. It was the same and not. It had lost a shutter. It had gained a crack under the eaves as if the roof were a hat the building had outgrown. The sign's letters had been retraced. The paint was darker. The word vacancy had an underline now, a little flourish like the clerk's pen had grown proud. He went in. The bell was still perfectly round. The clerk entered from the same door, with the same expression that had never yet found a reason to learn itself. He made the marks in the ledger. He set the key on the counter. He said the line he always said. "All quiet," he said, and then softer, "except the one that's sealed." "I'll take that one," the traveler said, because the sentence had learned how to be his. The clerk lifted his eyes. In them was nothing like a warning. There was recognition. There was the curve of a road you know by heart. He turned a page back in the ledger, then forward. Then he set the pen down and leaned his hands on the counter, as if it were a rail he could use to pull himself out of a deep pool. "It's sealed," he said again. "We don't let it out." "Then let me in," the traveler said, and he did not know what part of him had been practicing that answer. The clerk studied him a moment longer, the way a building might consider the wind and decide which of its groans to give it. Then he nodded. He reached to the brass hooks and lifted a key that had not gathered dust, that had not cooled, that looked as if it had been made just now for this exact exchange. 313, he said, and placed it on the counter between them so gently that the bell did not ring. The stair held its breath. The hallway stood straighter than buildings that old have any business standing. The rug lay flat as water. The door waited. He did not knock. He slid the key into the lock, and the lock accepted it with the cranky pride of machines that enjoy working when they think you don't expect them to. He turned. He felt something unpick itself. The door opened inward. The room smelled the way closed rooms do when someone's memory has been keeping them aired. The dust lay as a law. The bedspread's vines braided into loops. The window showed a rain that the day had not reported. The desk held the mirror, the pen, the book. He crossed to the desk. He put his palm flat on the book, as if it were a chest he could wake with warmth. He lifted the cover. The last entry was his. The one beneath it had a thumb-smudged name and the sentence he had written in his own room, far from here, long ago. "Don't open the door when it knocks." He closed the book. He sat in the chair. The window breathed. The housekeeper's reflection appeared in the mirror as if she were standing behind him and did not want to startle him by speaking too soon. "You came back," she said. He did not turn. "I don't know that I left." "Fair," she said. "Some people stay for years without ever checking in." He looked up at her in the mirror. She looked as she had. Her uniform had been sewn. Her eyes were smarter than the light. He studied the edge of the mirror where the frame had a chip shaped like a leaf that had learned how to be metal. "What is this place?" he asked. "It's a hotel," she said, as if she had spent a lifetime practicing the generosity it took to keep that answer true. "It's what it needs to be. It's the way out for some. It's the way in for others. It holds a shape for you until you can decide what shape you need." "And this room?" "This room remembers," she said. "It keeps the time that can't be told outside. It keeps the lateness. It keeps the knock. It keeps the names until they learn themselves." "And you?" "I clean," she said. "I keep the dust where it belongs. I tell people not to put their weight where it will break them. I take the muffins out of the oven when the clerk forgets the timer. I stand at doors and ask people to let them alone. I have been here a long time." "Were you a guest?" A smile sounded in her throat. "We all are. We just take different shifts." He turned then, but the mirror had lied to him with kindness. There was no one in the room. The chair against the wall was empty. The towels in the bathroom were folded into sailing ships that would never travel. He stood and went to the door and closed it and turned the lock and felt something on the other side press back once, gently, as if the hall wished him luck. He did not sleep. The clock on the nightstand had no plug but kept time. He sat and he listened, and the building told him that once, in 1974, a storm had come the wrong way, and a bus had missed its stop, and a girl had run upstairs to tell a secret to walls that had been waiting 50 years to hear it. He learned the names of bones he did not know were inside houses. He learned the way the roof called to the floor, the way a lighthouse calls to boats. He learned the voice of the key in the lock. He learned the knock. It came at 3:13. 2. Pause. 1. He did not open. He did what he had told the boy in the other hotel to do. He listened while the knock moved down the hall and back up, and then settled in front of his door again like a dog resigning itself to patience. He whispered to it the way one whispers to rain. He asked it for time, and it offered him silence. He wrote in the book. He wrote a story in the margins where no one would think to read. He wrote that the door should remain closed, and that the room would stay sealed, and that the hotel would open when it needed to, and not one moment before. He wrote the names of the ones who had gone. He left out dates because he had learned what they do to the heart. In the morning, he returned the key. The clerk was at the desk. He had a different tie. He was pale as the familiar company of the dark. He did not congratulate the traveler for his courage. He did not chastise him for anything at all. He took the key and hung it gently back on its hook. "You'll take the day shift," the clerk said. The sentence landed as calmly as a hand on a shoulder. It should have made the traveler step back. Instead, it made him breathe in. The lobby air smelled like polish and old tobacco, and the sweetness of something baking that would never reach a plate. "I don't work here," the traveler said, because he could still hear who he had been. "You do," the clerk said. "We all do. Some of us for a while, some of us for longer, some of us until the story ends." "What story is that?" "The one it tells itself," the clerk said. The traveler looked around the lobby. The umbrellas in the stand considered the weather. The postcards on the rack waited for their image to go out of style. The painting over the fireplace showed a willow bent low, so low that its reflection could speak into the water, and the water, patient and darker than the room, could answer. He thought of highways and offices and kitchens with black and white squares and the people who stood there, measuring recipes of time and hope. He thought of doors. He thought of knocks. "Who takes the night?" he asked. The clerk's mouth moved at the corners. It wasn't a smile. It was a kindness escaping in spite of its training. "I do," he said. "And when you're ready, you will." The traveler stood at the desk, then behind it. The ledger weight felt right under his hand. The nib of the pen made the nib noise. He turned the page. He wrote a line that waited half a day for its subject, and then a man pushed through the glass door, rain making a map of his shoulders, eyes bright with the kind of tired the world sells most often. "Late," the traveler said. The words fit his mouth like a memory. "But we're open." "One night," the man said. "One night," the traveler agreed, and he understood now how wide that could be. He handed over a key. When the man hesitated, eyes sliding past the desk to the case of brass like a deer listening to something a hunter cannot hear, the traveler added a sentence that tasted like a rule. "All quiet," he said, "except the one that's sealed." The man nodded. He didn't ask which one. He didn't need to. He went up the stairs, and the carpet held his weight as if it knew where it would put him down. The traveler stood still until the building relaxed. He looked at the clock. It had no plug. It kept time. The housekeeper appeared from the back with a tray of muffins and a glance that could balance a life. She set the tray down. She adjusted the bell on the counter because it liked to sit off center. She looked at the traveler's face and saw what the mirror had shown her earlier in the room above. She nodded once, like someone counting a step she had taken 1,000 times. "Day shift," she said. "For now?" he answered. She smiled with her throat the way she had. "For now's the longest measure we get." He made notes in the ledger. He checked the hooks. He learned the little inefficiencies the building liked. Sugar placed on the wrong tray. Towels folded into ships that never traveled. A light bulb in the hallway that burned slightly warmer than the others, because it had once been touched by a hand that had wanted to see better just once more. He waited for the knock he knew would come, even for those who kept their doors closed. He practiced the sentence he'd leave in the book for the one who would need it. He stood behind the desk and felt the road take its weight off his bumper and the rain stand aside to let him pass, and the hours align like lines on a page. At 3:13, a sound moved through the wood of the building. It might have been a door learning its work. It might have been a heart that had decided which rhythm to keep. The traveler looked at the clock and then at the painting, and then at the guestbook on the desk beside him. It lay open to his name. It lay open to the past he had not yet had. It lay open to the page he would turn for the next man, the next woman, the next visitor who would arrive believing they had missed their exit and that the hotel had found them because it was easier than going home and harder than it looked. The bell chimed. He looked up. The glass door opened. A young woman stepped in, hair wet, eyes bright with the confusion of relief. She offered him her name and a credit card, as if either could anchor her. "Just a room," she said. "Of course," he said. "One night?" "One night." He wrote the date. He made the mark. He reached for a key. His hand hovered. There are many kinds of mercy. There are few kinds of truth. The traveler thought of black squares on kitchen floors. He thought of the sentence he had carried in his wallet until it dissolved. He thought of doors that wait and the patience of rooms and the way buildings learn the tread of their people and choose who to hold and who to let go and who to teach how to stand behind a counter and say the only line that matters. He placed the key to 312 on the counter. He looked at the heavy tag beside it, the one marked 313. The brass caught the light and held it. "All quiet," he said to the woman, and let the sentence hang a moment longer than it needed to. "Except the one that's sealed." She did not ask which one. She did not need to. She went up. The housekeeper moved through the lobby with a tray of sugar packets. The traveler shifted his weight from one foot to the other, feeling for the black squares he could not see, and found them. He respected them. He stood there as the clock turned the hour. He stood there as the bell chimed the entrance of another and then another. He stood there until evening learned how to be night. He stood there as 313 approached, like a slow step on an old stair. When the knock came, he did not go to it. He listened as it tried doors, and tried his name, and tried the quiet the building had earned. He rested his palm on the guestbook to steady it against the breeze from a window he had not opened. He breathed, and the building breathed, and the willow tree in the painting bent lower until its leaves touched the water, and the water spoke to the leaves in a language the traveler now understood. Morning came. It always does. He unlocked the glass door, and the day entered with its coat unbuttoned. The bell chimed once, twice, the way small bells greet anything that moves through their world with grace. The traveler poured coffee. He remembered the sugar. He wrote a small note and slid it under the door of the room at the end of the hall with no number on it. He wrote only, "Don't open the door when it knocks. If you can, take the day shift. If you can't, we'll keep the book open to your page until you find your way back to write it yourself." He signed it with his name. He did not think of leaving. Not yet. He would, one day. He would take a road that did not resemble a sentence with only the one end. He would step out into afternoon and blink at the sun and keep walking until the house behind him was only a story he told other people when they needed to understand what it meant to check in. For now, he turned the page of the ledger. He lifted his pen. He waited. The door opened. A man stepped in. The bell made the sound it had been designed for. "Late," the traveler said. "But we're open," the man finished, and smiled with the relief of being given the right line to say. The traveler handed him a key. As their fingers touched the brass, the building exhaled, and in the painting, the willow's leaves brushed the water, and the water said back the only words that matter. Here. Now. The traveler looked at the clock that had no plug and kept time, and then at the door that could knock and knock and knock, and would always be answered by silence if the people inside chose it. He looked at the page with his name and the blank lines beneath, and he understood that some hotels offer comfort, and some offer a map, and some offer something far more permanent. You stand behind the desk long enough, and you learn the difference. He turned the page. He waited for the next name. And above them all, a room remembered.